Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT Show. This is our 100th show. 100 shows, right? You look at any of the sort of broadcast media, etc., how many of them can claim to have accumulated 100 shows? And it's been a class act throughout, with the exception of me, of course. You've had philosophers, you've had writers, you've had journalists, you've had editors, you've had columnists, you've had academics. I mean, the whole range. And we've had movie actors, Oscar-winning movie actors along the way. And we've got more and more special guests lined up for our next century of shows. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. Thanks to you, the TNT Show and Indie Live are growing and delivering more exciting shows. You can watch the TNT Show on IndieLive.net, streamed out on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and you'll be able to see on YouTube any of the previous shows. So you've got 99 shows plus tonight's to choose from. When did the BBC ever make that claim? It's been another great day for British democracy, as I always say. When Boris Johnson told a 70-year-old odd woman who had to travel in bus all day just to keep warm, his answer was, "I introduced reduced fee buses." Well, it turns out that even less than sympathetic response is yet another lie. Apparently it was introduced by the previous administration before he took over. Maybe the real Tory plan is to introduce food banks on buses. Who knows? Tonight, we are talking to a very special guest. And this is yet another first for the TNT Show. We are joined tonight by 16-year-old Euan MacLeod. Now, those of you who watched Debate Night will have been as impressed as I suspect I am with his forthright views on independence. So Euan is here for a full hour, and he's taking your questions live. So there's still time to get a question considered. You'll find the details at IndieLive.net. Well, the nation talks. So in many respects, this is your show. We're live and we're free. So no license, no problem. Now, to our guest tonight, the nation talks to Euan MacLeod. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
Hello, John. I'm very good. How's yourself?
Pretty good, pretty good. How's the weather in Peebles?
It's very nice, actually. It's been sunny for a change, which is nice to see. Makes a change from all the rain that we've been having.
Okay. Well, hope the rain stays away. Maybe that's a big ask in me in Scotland, but who knows? Let me ask you a sort of broad question, if I may. How did you end up on Debate Night?
So originally with Debate Night, it started with my politics teacher at the high school had mentioned to us that the BBC were coming to the town to obviously film Debate Night, and we could apply to be part of the audience. For years, I've been interested in politics, so I thought it would probably be a good thing to go along to, even just for the experience. Even if I wasn't to speak, it'd be a good thing to go along and get an insight into that sort of thing. So I went through the application process, had multiple phone calls, and then eventually it came to the Thursday night, and I was there.
And what were the multiplicity of phone calls? Why was that necessary?
So the original phone call was to obviously find out about political views. They asked a lot of questions, your opinion on Scottish independence and political parties that you would vote for and how you would vote again should there be another independence referendum. And obviously the basic questions, occupation and all that sort of thing. And then there was other ones regarding health and safety, but it was quite a lengthy process all in all.
And did you think that the audience was balanced?
I would say it was balanced to an extent. The people who I was sat with, the gentleman across the front that were sat across the front row and a couple behind me seemed to be of the same mindset of myself. However, there did seem to be quite a few more that were more in favour of the union, which I did notice.
Which is rather odd when you think that the country is split, according to the opinion polls, roughly 50-50.
Yeah.
Were you surprised?
I wouldn't say I was surprised, in all fairness. I wouldn't expect any less from the BBC with packing the audience full of those that support the union. I won't lie.
Were you surprised at the impact that your presence had afterwards?
Yeah, I was. I must admit, I didn't expect that to get the reaction I did. So following the few brief words that I said, I received a round of applause, and then following the show, I actually had 3 or 4 members from the audience come up to me and shake my hand and say that it was good to see those of my generation thinking, forward thinking with Scottish independence.
Well, it was actually more than that. Sparing your blushes, Euan. It was the fact that you were articulate. Because it's one thing to have a view, it's quite another thing to be able to express that view in terms that people find accessible. There's loads of examples of that around. I mean, I can think of the Prime Minister, for one, who punctuates almost everything he says with as he desperately casts around to try and remember this Spin Doctor's Q&A that was prevented presumably only 60 or seconds or so before he went on air.
Yeah.
But there you were. I have to be honest with you. When I looked at you, I thought you must be 18, 19. You're a guy that really has been around a long time and sort of, So all credit to you. All credit to you. I think you did a great job. I mean, it's people seem to think that being on television is pretty straightforward, but as you pointed out, there's all that sort of stuff at the beginning.
Yeah.
All these, these things you have to jumps you have to cater for, and then when you get into the studio, it's a very unreal environment. It's not like we are right now.
Oh yeah.
I mean, what was your feeling when you walked in there with all the lights and stuff?
When I first walked in, it was definitely a different look. I'm quite used to seeing the local theatre in much less than what it is. I do a bit of amateur acting as well in there. So when I went in, I wasn't expecting the scale to what it was with what had practically been a full studio assembled in there, with many more cameras than what I expected.
It's interesting. What we're going to do now, if Kevin has it set up, is to show a brief clip from debate night. Are you ready, Kevin? If you are, let's run it.
For myself, I would agree that the union is unsalvageable. I've grown up in a majority of a Conservative administration with the farce that was Brexit, of Scotland being dragged out of the EU against its will. And then as well with the Partygate scandal, Westminster has been the face of the union. And for young people growing up in Scotland like myself, I've seen that the union is broken. They're not doing what's best for Scotland.
See? I wasn't lying when I said it was impressive. How does it feel like to look at yourself in that way? I mean, how does it make you feel?
I think it's quite surreal, in all fairness, because I'd very much intended on going along and not actually saying anything. And I'm quite happy that I did say something when I did, because I know for a fact I would now be sitting here regretting not saying something. When I had the opportunity to.
Well, you know something, you just learned a life lesson there. If you ask people at the end of their lives what they regret most, one of the things they'll always say to you is, I should have spoken up,
Yeah.
I wish I'd spoken up.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I'm not quite sure, there's a whole bunch of reasons why people don't speak up, but they invariably, in many cases, regret it afterwards. So I think, as I say, there's a life lesson there. Let's talk about other young people. I hate this because it's a cliched question, but I reckon you're the sort of guy that can take this on and deal with it. The opinion polls seem to indicate that a preponderance of young people are inclined to favour independence. Why do you think that is?
I think, from my point of view, with the generation that we've grown up with, so for the past 10 years or so, obviously, we've been saddled with the Tory government that, of course, Scotland has never actually voted for down in Westminster. And the things that our generation are seeing them doing aren't what's right. With, we've got the slash to universal credit. And it seems to us like the way that Westminster runs politics is very old-fashioned in comparison to the needs of what we need nowadays in our generation.
And I mean, what you've just said might apply right across the generations, right across the age groups. It doesn't, because the reality is that in as much as you and younger people of a preponderance view of favouring independence at the later stages of life. If I use that diplomatic phrase, once people get to over 60, that proportion completely reverses itself.
Yeah.
I mean, it does. Instead of 25% in favour of independence amongst people under, I think, 18 or so, or 24 or so, that's the percentage in favour of independence once you get about 60. So I go back to my question again. What is it that affects young people that makes them so, in such a majority way, favour independence?
I think with ourselves, obviously, a main issue for us would have been, for myself speaking, was Brexit. We seen that the benefits that we reaped from the European Union, the support that we received as a country, and then for Scotland to vote overwhelmingly to remain within the EU, but then still be taken out against their will. I think that really resonated with us. Of that didn't sit right. Of that wasn't what the people of Scotland wanted, and that's what made a lot of us realise that independence is going to be our best way out of the situation we're currently in.
Now, let me task you on this one then. You're located in the borders.
Yes.
Right? Most people looking at the borders and looking at the political sympathies of people who live on the borders might be excused for thinking that you're a rare creature indeed, supporting independence, because it seems to be predominantly blue. It's a sort of, the impression the rest of Scotland gets is that here's a blue area where people who are conservative consistently get elected and re-elected. What's your take on that?
I think it's unfortunate that the area has got predominantly votes blue, because obviously for quite some time the borders is a generally older generation of people, with the majority of the population being in their older years. I think with what might change this is the younger generation, particularly people who are in my year at school, who have told me that they don't like the Conservatives and are going to vote for another party. And hopefully that would push us over the boundary to taking the borders from being a blue area and hopefully changing it to a pro-independence one.
That's interesting. So you think there might be a demographic at work there?
I hope so. I hope there is.
So let me ask you a similar question, but related, obviously. When you look across your school, and you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, is it your impression that that preponderance of people who are sympathetic to independence is represented in your school or the borders generally, as well, to the extent that you might know that?
I would definitely say from the majority of people I've spoken to, from my close friends, I would say that they are definitely more in favour of independence. There are a few who are still very conservatively minded. Even some of my closest friends are still conservatively minded. But I believe that comes down to, obviously, the way that upbringing has happened. A lot of them have decided that they are conservative purely off the fact that their parents have voted conservative. And I think what needs to happen is, obviously, our generation need to decide that we're going to make decisions for our own. We're not going to follow what our parents have done and, make a rational choice based on what we think is right.
Would you know if these folks are conservative or unionist or a mixture of both?
I think from most of the people I've spoken to have been conservative and unionist out of my school. I've never really met any that have been just conservative or just unionist and then supporting other parties. Yeah,
it's interesting because there have been rumbles for a decade now that the Tory party is held together with a bit of sellotape and
yeah.
and they sought to bind it all together by thumping the unionist drum.
Yeah.
Because the folly in that approach is that there's another unionist party that might adopt the same approach and be better at it, and that seems to be what's happened now. Labour seems to be the sort of unionist go-to place, in a way that might have a big impact on the Conservative vote. Now, you'll be voting tomorrow, right?
I will be, yes.
Let me put this question that arrived just before we came on air. It's from Andrew Steele, and he says, get somebody who is old enough to vote and shave This is farcical. What would you say to Andrew? Help Andrew out here, please.
Well, funnily enough, I am old enough to shave and old enough to vote as well. I will be going out tomorrow after sitting one of my exams at school to head out and vote. And I would encourage definitely anyone the same age as me to get out there and do that. You know, it's obviously if you've just turned 16, it's the first opportunity for that. And I would wholeheartedly encourage you to do the same.
And how many people do you think are aware that this is a single transferable vote process, i.e., that there will be a list of candidates, and there's an effective way to do that, to handle that voting paper, and an ineffective way. Do you think people are aware of that? It's called vote until you vote.
Yeah,
Have you heard of that?
I have. Yeah. I think it's definitely within my school. It's well known that it's STV. It's in fact covered in the modern studies curriculum for, I believe it's in 3rd, 4th, and 5th year. We cover it. So I think at least at my school, people are going to be well versed in the way that the voting system works. And I hope from the voting figures from tomorrow that will be shown.
Yeah, I mean that'll be interesting because I've seen lots of, but you can't really rely on this too much. But on social media, you get people saying, "Well, people just don't understand that they have to keep marking and marking and marking, and you will end up voting for a Tory," they said, but that's okay, as long as it's number 7 or 8.
Exactly.
Okay. Here's another leading question. I do apologise for this too. I mean, like many people, I've been very impressed by your articulation. How would you rate your school experience?
My
on a
school
scale of 0 to 10, 0 being plain awful, 10 being excellent.
I would definitely say a 9. You know, I've been offered wealths of support from teachers. Even when it comes to this, following the clip of me on debate night, I had a lot of teachers come up to me and ask me how it was, and offer to sit down and have a chat with me, which was really good. And I've experienced that throughout the years. You know, they're more than happy to take time to help you, which is what I'd be looking for.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I mean, I suspect not everyone has that experience. It seems to me. I mean, you're clearly a beneficiary. I mean, you seem to be the product of two things. One is a good school with staff with good people, coupled with an innate intelligence. And when you get that combination coming together, it's a very powerful product, really.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the world's leading scientists and others, they benefited from that. Not necessarily initially in their careers, but later on. Here's a question. Does Euan regard as the most important issues to be covered before a campaign for independence proper begins are the Constitution, currency, EU, EFTA, etc.? Do you think these are the issues if there was a referendum that ought to be front and central, or do you feel there might be other issues that people are interested in and haven't gotten that sort of boost or publicity?
I definitely, out of the ones that have been mentioned there, I definitely think the Constitution and EU are at the forefront. I think most definitely before when we're considering independence, a codified constitution is something that has to be on the books. Yeah. Have it down in writing what legally binds our country and what the situation is. Because with the UK one at the moment, obviously with it being uncodified, it can be changed however the government sees fit, which of course leads to issues with potential with the way that the government runs. I definitely think that would be one of the main issues that has to be front and centre when we go into the second independence campaign. And as well with the EU, I think definitely if we can look to put plans in place to potentially rejoining the EU as soon as possible, I think that would definitely provide a boost. Because again, that was one of the main issues with the referendum in 2014. We were told that if we left the UK, our position in the EU would be at stake. And then 2 years later, we're dragged out of it against our will. So I definitely think those two would be main issues that should be front and centre going into this next campaign. I
suspect if there was a referendum tomorrow or soon, that one of the issues that would crop up wouldn't be that one, of course, because that's spent and that's gone. It would be, this is the wrong time to have a referendum when the world is at war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
What would your answer be to that?
I think obviously with the war going on in Ukraine, I think the room for an independence referendum is still there. Obviously, with the UK, we're providing aid to Ukraine, but at the same time, we shouldn't forget about our own issues at home. You know, we're still facing these issues from Westminster where we've not got enough money to provide benefits to people who are starving because of the Tory government that we have just now. And I don't think we should put it on the back burner just because of that, if you see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I mean, and also we don't live in a static environment. I mean,
Yeah.
things are changing all the time. And if your contention is, which seems to be the contention of most of the independence movement, that until we're free of the dead hand of Westminster, we won't ever be able to make a proper contribution to the world.
Yeah.
And you could argue if independent Scotland might be able to add its voice, who knows in what way, shape or form, but that won't ever happen in the present circumstances, where you know, government ministers of hugely indifferent quality are making decisions on your behalf and on my behalf, which is somewhat frustrating. So if you're looking career-wise, if you're looking ahead, where do you think you might move once you've presumably qualified from school and gone on to university? What would you like to study there?
So at university, I'm considering studying criminology at the moment, and that seems to be the line of interest for myself at the moment. I think that's probably what best suits when it comes to higher study for myself.
Why criminology? Do you think Scotland has too many criminals, or do you think the way they're being treated is ineffective or inefficient, or what is it that drives you? What drives that? What's the motivation for doing that, Euan?
The motivation for me was obviously after I finished university, I hope to go on to join the police, and you know, get out there and meet new people and genuinely make a difference. I think that's what struck me for quite a while. Is I want a job where I can meet new people, I can learn about people's differences, and then obviously hopefully make a meaningful change at the same time.
Couldn't you do that in politics?
Yeah, so politics was the other idea. After I've been in the police, I'm considering going into a line of politics, and then at the same time would be able to use my experience from the police, you know, meeting people, realizing the issues that people face. I could then use that to take into politics and then make a greater difference for other people.
My, you could be the first minister from the borders. I'm just thinking. I mean, I can just see the appeal to the electorate. Here's a guy that used to be a copper and he's now a politician. You think, oh, what more could you ask for in life? You know, so, somebody who understands. Now, the Tories in England, returning to reality now here, or the present day rather, are billing themselves as local Tories. I think the notion that underpins that is that if you say you're local, you can dissociate yourself from Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Have you noticed any of that happening in the borders?
I have actually. One of my closest friends, he, as a Conservative, has actually come out to me and said, you know, I absolutely despise what the Conservatives are doing in Westminster, but still align myself with the Conservative values. And that's coming from one of my closest friends. I'm not too sure from other people. I've not heard that much, but obviously that in the case that I have heard, that's been it. Yeah,
there's an interesting speculation that goes around about where the Conservative support comes from and how deeply embedded it is. I'll ask you a question I've asked others over the last 99 shows. Why is there no right-wing nationalist party in Scotland, do you think?
I think there's no right-wing nationalist party because of, I certainly would agree with myself. Well, I'd certainly agree that the way of the people of Scotland is very forward-thinking. You know, we're very good in the way of wanting social reform. We want benefits. We want to make sure that life is as good as possible for people. And I think that's why there hasn't been, you know, the area of development for a right-wing Scottish party.
But you would think that if somebody wasn't, say somebody was right-wing and not hugely enthusiastic about what's happening at Westminster, you think they might say to themselves, well, if there is going to be an independent Scotland, then I prefer it not to be completely left-wing.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm motivated to stand as a Scottish Conservative in the full sense of that term.
Yeah.
I based in Edinburgh, whatever, not run from central office in London, but and therefore I need to make a move soon, because if I make a move after independence, it may be that ground I would wish to occupy is filled by some people who've defected from the SNP or some of the independence party, and I've lost my chance now. It's gone. Because people already know them and they've already been MSPs, and okay, now they have a Scottish Conservative tag instead of a SNP tag or whatever. Because you have to think that in a country the size of Scotland, 5 million people in odds, that there must be a reasonably substantial right-wing vote.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree there probably is a substantial right-wing vote, but if, in all fairness, I really wouldn't see why there is no right wing. I'm genuinely not too sure. Yeah, it's a difficult one. The commonest reaction I get from the centre right interviewees or guests is that the SNP is such a broad church. Yeah, that there's no space for anyone. They accommodate everybody because they're so flexible. Yeah. I mean, the flaw in that argument, of course, is that, well, no, they ain't actually. They're left of centre. They say it every single day, if you care to listen. They say, we're left of centre, we believe in social reform, social progress, all the things that you mentioned as being important to you. Yeah. It's what the SNP say. They say it all the time. They want to spend money on social causes. They want to spend more money on disadvantaged, et cetera, et cetera. So you could say, well, hold on a second, it's not such a broad church. Or it might be a broad church, but the only people that actually speak up are the people on the left. And that would give us an opportunity to set up a Conservative party. But clearly it doesn't happen. And I've yet to hear of a hugely convincing reason why that's not the case. But who knows? And there must be some people, for example, who believe that Brexit is a terribly good thing, that there are too many immigrants, that there are too much money spent on people who are feckless. I'm just going through the Conservative tropes now. Yeah. And you would think that there would be a constituency there. But the constituency seems to be about unionism and not about conservatism, which I think is a little bit odd. So you'll be voting tomorrow. Yes. Now, obviously, your vote is a secret between you and the ballot system. But I got the impression that you would probably be voting for one of the independence parties, if I can put it that way. What do you think the outcome is going to be when the votes are counted tomorrow? I'm hoping certainly for the borders, we'll look to see a change. Hopefully less blue than what we have already. I think certainly within the borders, it's time for a change when it comes to the council administration. I think with a pro-independence council in place, we could look to replace things such as, speaking from personal experience, the school that I attend faced a massive fire. We lost half the building, and here we are 2 years on, 3 years on, and all we have in place just now is simply ground plans to what the school will potentially be rebuilt to in, say, 10 years' time. And unfortunately, I don't see that as good enough. A lot of people at my school are currently working out of porta cabins. And for the time being, yes, they work, but at the same time, we don't want it to drag on where we're not going to have the facilities that we require to get the best level of education. Yeah, that's very sad. I wasn't aware of that. I mean, it does sound troublesome and challenging to that. But then again, you sound very enthusiastic about the quality of education you're getting despite all of that. What is the composition of your local authority? Is it very blue, or is it sort of rather mixed? Yeah, at the moment it's very blue, with the Conservatives leading, and there's a select of independents as well, I believe. So hopefully, as of tomorrow, we could look to see a change in less of the blue, and a scattering of the independence parties being in there, and then potentially more independents as well that agree with independence and wanting what's best for the local area. Yeah. It's interesting.
I mean, the borders is a fairly broad geographical area.
Yeah.
Is it perhaps the case that there are deeper blue parts and less blue parts?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know certainly where I come from in Peebles, it's a very conservative leaning town, unfortunately. But I'm hoping, obviously, you know, with the quality of education we're receiving, with a lot of the younger people coming up, that we can see that the Conservatives aren't doing what's best for us, and that we can hopefully make a change for that tomorrow.
When you say the people you know from school are not enthusiastic about Boris Johnson, what is it in particular that offends them?
A lot of people have seen it with Brexit, so a lot of them agreeing with the fact that Scotland has been dragged out of the EU, when overwhelmingly voting not to leave. And then as well with Partygate is a main one. That has been a very much a deciding factor for a lot of people I know. A lot of people I know have had relatives pass away during the times where Boris Johnson was having parties down in Downing Street. And they just seen that as just absolutely disgraceful. The fact that we now have a prime minister who has actually been questioned under caution by the police and also given a fine for parties that he held whilst people's relatives were dying, whilst people couldn't visit family members for months on end. And I think that's very much what's tipped the balance with the younger people, is the fact that they suffered so much themselves during these lockdowns and weren't able to see family members. And then to have it come out that their main government was actually partying on down in their offices is what tipped it for them.
So you're not impressed by Boris's explanation that he wasn't aware he was breaking the law?
Oh no, not at all. It's ridiculous, the fact that it's been lie after lie after lie with it. You know, first there wasn't a party, and then if there was a party, they didn't know the rules were being broken, and there was no rules broken, and it's ridiculous. The farce that's gone on for this long.
Yes, it's a farce is a good way of putting it. And thinking about ferries, you could almost call it a fiasco. Here's some interesting news that arrived tonight. The Bank of England has announced that interest rates will rise 0.5% tomorrow. The reason I mention that is that this is happening right before an election.
Yeah.
And yet the Met Police told us that they couldn't move forward on Partygate because there was an election coming up. What do you think of that?
I think it's ridiculous. I think it's very much of they're trying their very best to save their image before this election, because they know for a fact when it comes out, it's going to completely undermine people's confidence in democracy as a whole. The fact that we have a prime minister and a cabinet who think they can lie and cheat their way out of these sort of things just purely to save their own front.
Yeah, it speaks to you could argue it speaks to a wider malaise, because you're now talking about not just corruption at that area in Westminster and the Prime Minister and his cabinet, but also the institutions. I mean, you know, the Bank of England is an institution. It has chosen to act one way. The Met Police is another institution that's decided to behave very differently.
Yeah,
almost in what sounds like a partisan way. I mean, that speaks to corruption extending well beyond just the principles.
yeah.
You know, and I know there's a cliche, Euan, that a fish rots from the head down. I'm not sure how true that is actually in practice, but let's assume that it is. This seems to be a classic example of that. Do you find that do you get a sense that the actual institutions in the country have been corrupted?
I would say so. I think that the stemming from Westminster, they have such an outreach that they have been able to corrupt these institutions, you know, the ones that stand for honesty, integrity, and have been able to sway them in one way or another to save their political backside, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, we talked earlier about the things that would be important in a referendum, and one of the things that was mentioned was the Constitution and the fact that the UK doesn't have a codified Constitution. Does the Constitution feature in the work that you do going forward to your exams?
It's not actually. It was briefly covered within my politics course, but then we were told that it had been removed for the final exam by the SQA. I'm unsure as to why that was. I'm not sure whether it was because of COVID. But it seemed interesting that they decided to remove just that part. So from the 3 sections, they decided to remove the part on constitutions, which was only covered in 1 or 2 lessons in our class, but we were told that it wouldn't be covered in the final exam.
That's quite disturbing, because the reality is that very few people in this country understand what a constitution is. Even fewer understand the difference between an uncodified constitution, which is the UK version, and a codified constitution. I.e., a codified constitution is one that you can go to one particular document and see, look, here we are, this is the constitution. The UK is just a bundle of conventions, a half-remembered legislation, which may or may not be out of date, plus a number of statements by various academics, which means that anyone can go to any part of it and say, look, this is what the Constitution says. How they attach any sort of real worth to these statements is moot, it seems to me. And for that question about codified and uncodified constitutions being removed, it strikes me as a backward step, even allowing for the problems of COVID. I personally regret that. I mean, we did some work and offered a course on the Constitution to the Scottish education people, and they told us that they didn't want it because it sounded political. Well, that's a bit like saying democracy sounds political.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. As you look around the world, amongst all the developed countries, almost all of them have a constitution that's codified.
Yeah.
The UK and Israel don't, but they're the exceptions rather than the rule.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a great pity that people at school are not learning more about constitutions, because we also did a study. We looked at 2 years ago. We looked at people's understanding of constitutions, and it was very fraught and frail, very frail. I mean, 50% could say categorically that the US has a constitution.
Yeah.
But only 34% knew that Ireland had a written constitution, and even fewer thought that Germany had, France had, Spain had, Italy had.
Yeah.
And that's an education problem. That's not something that can be tackled by political parties. That seems to me that should happen at your stage.
Yeah.
Not somebody's responsibility later on.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah. Mike Fenwick is asking, what activities would you recommend or suggest that people of your age might be interested in terms of showing their support for independence? He's put in brackets, maybe not marches.
At my age, personally, what I would recommend is something like Twitter. I mean, I've had a Twitter account for quite some time now, sharing the occasional political post. But since debate night, I've managed to grow somewhat of a following on there, which obviously has allowed me to, give a voice for younger people when it comes to politics. As well, you can look down the routes of, petitions and online demonstrations, which is definitely something I would suggest for younger people to get involved in. Obviously, marches are quite out there with a lot of travel required, and then obviously safeguarding. But I think definitely there is a lot that people can do just from their own home with the likes of social media and online petitions.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. How effective do you think the independence parties are in terms of their social media presence?
I would say they're definitely very good when it comes to social media presence. A lot of I personally get a lot of targeted adverts on the likes of Facebook from independence parties, which is obviously showing that whatever they're doing to reach out to the younger generation is working. So, for example, with the Scottish National Party, I have received adverts on the under-22s bus travel, which obviously applies to myself and then to education as well. And I believe that shows that whatever these independence parties do to reach the younger generation is definitely working.
That takes us on rather neatly, conveniently, to the mass media. Now, mass media tends to be consumed disproportionately by people who are older.
Yeah.
Where do you, and if this is not too broad a question, where do you and people of your age get their news from?
a lot of the news for myself comes from the likes of Sky News. I tend to steer away from the state-owned media like the BBC. As well, just occasionally, whenever the news is on, I'll put it on for 30 odd minutes or so. But as well, most of my news comes through social media. So a lot of news stories that get posted on Twitter and Facebook is mainly where I get a lot of my information from. And I can say the same with a lot of my friends. They're on Twitter and Facebook looking for news stories, and then as well through the school, a lot of news gets put through there with our modern studies teachers tell us about upcoming events, elections, or anything interesting political that's happened. But for myself, social media definitely has to be the main one for getting news.
That's interesting. And why don't you rate the BBC and others?
In all fairness, as much as people say that the BBC has an unbiased opinion, they definitely, to myself, lean towards the Conservative Party.
It's interesting. Well, we need to do some studies on this and see.
Yeah.
See what's backed up.
Yeah.
It's something I'm thinking about doing, by the way.
Yeah.
And if anybody watching and listening tonight is interested in doing a survey of the BBC in Scotland, let me know, because conventionally I use, when I do polls, I use the conventional polling outfits, but maybe there's a smarter way to do it, maybe through social media. Who knows? I want to ask another leading question, if I may.
Yeah.
Our producer is asking if you'd be interested in having a monthly show on Independence Live.
Yeah, I would be more than happy to do something like that. Definitely.
There you are, Kevin. There's your answer. Oh, he's also asking, what are the main social media channels used by people of your age? I hate to keep using that term, because you don't ask 55-year-olds, what about people your age? Because you don't expect them to give you an answer. But I'm now locked into it, so I'm stuck with it. So I apologize. What would you say to that?
The main one for me on Twitter was an account. It was called Politics for All. And they posted, with politics from across the board, with the French elections and the UK political scene. And then it came to a point where they actually got banned from Twitter, quite under the radar, which surprised me, because I went on one day to have a look, and they'd been completely wiped from Twitter, which surprised me, because they were actually probably one of the only ones on Twitter who were completely unbiased in every way. However, they still managed to just disappear off the platform. Yeah,
that happens a lot in social media. It's a great pity it doesn't happen in the broadcast media, when they make mistakes and get things wrong.
Yeah.
They seem to be able to carry on as before. Yeah. So you mentioned Twitter and you mentioned Facebook. Any other social media outlets that you find helpful?
I can't really think of any, in all fairness. It's mainly Twitter and Facebook for myself.
What do you think might be the difference now that Twitter might be taken over by Musk? Do you think that will make a difference?
I hope it doesn't make a difference. I hope it's obviously, I hope that people are still going to be able to give their own political opinions, like myself on Twitter. And I hope that it's not going to lead to the suppression of parties that support unpalatable ideas, if you get where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be that's one of the challenges. I say that, but I'm reflecting the way that the media used to be organised in the UK.
Yeah.
Where, only specific channels were allowed, and these channels had to be impartial.
Yeah.
And if they weren't impartial, people get very upset, and the channels would take it on the chin and change and do what they could to adapt. That's all gone now. The BBC just treats complaints like, who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
And what that does, unfortunately, is destroy their credibility as a news outlet. And it also badly affects the credibility and seeming integrity of the people who propagate the material. And that's hard to recover from. I mean, I used to teach business ethics, and I can tell you, if you make an ethical mistake in business, it comes back and bites you in the ass. That's if you're lucky. If you're lucky, it bites you.
Yeah.
If you're not lucky, then you're out of business. because reputational damage can kill you still.
Oh, yeah.
And the same thing applies to whatever media outlet you're talking about. But here's a classic. GB News, which is the new Rupert Murdoch channel, apparently at some stages is getting zero coverage, i.e., the number of people watching is sufficiently low that when you put it on a chart and compare it with other media outlets, it's moving along the bottom line there. So I think they're getting about 20,000,
Yeah.
But I suspect over a period of time, we'll probably be looking at numbers like that as well, and we don't have Rupert Murdoch's backing, thank goodness, because we're free to do and behave as we wish. And we try to be temperate in everything we do, obviously. But we don't have anyone out there saying, you must do this, you must do that. I have Kevin occasionally saying, hey, your internet connection is lousy, but that's a different thing. It's not about content, that's about delivery. We've only got less than 15 minutes to go, and I want to make sure we get the best use of your time, Euan. Is there anything that we haven't covered up until now that you would like to talk about?
I can't really think of anything, to be honest. I think we've covered most of what I was looking to talk about.
I mean, for example, what would your views be on how quickly a referendum ought to be called?
I think definitely. If we look at it, from what we've been told, 2023 would be the ideal time for us to call one, and hopefully we'll see one by then. But if that isn't the case, I would realistically hope to see a referendum within 5 to 10 years, if not to get it in 2023. And if we don't get it in 2023, we should push to have it every year until such point as we do get one.
Isn't the flaw in that logic, everything depends on Boris Johnson saying yes?
Exactly. That's it. I think the fact that, when it comes down to that, it's a case of how quickly we can look to get rid of Boris Johnson and have somebody in place that would agree to allow Scotland to have its own self-determination.
But the question is, who would that be? Because Keir Starmer reckons that two things. One is he has now become fond of Brexit and he wouldn't seek to rejoin the EU. And secondly, he sees no reason to have a referendum on independence. And he doesn't favour independence, which is a fair enough point. But this streak of anti-democracy seems to run deep.
Yeah.
It seems to be cross-party.
Exactly.
The question is then, what do you do? I mean, let's say this was an exam question. And here you are, and the situation is that the UK Prime Minister might never agree. Anyone who replaces him is unlikely to agree. They will never say no. They won't, because that's undemocratic to say no. What they will say is, now is not the right time.
Yeah.
And you can associate anything with that. COVID, now is not the right time because of COVID. I've struck that out, not the right time because of Ukraine. Scroll that out, it's not the right time because of X, Y, and Z. Economic crisis goes on and goes on. So if you were being asked by the question setter, what do you recommend that the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament should do now in the light of that? How would you answer that?
I think the best option would be to look for other countries that would show support for Scottish independence in an attempt that Boris Johnson would see that and then obviously think that the political reputation of the UK is on the line when it comes if the world stage is endorsing Scotland to become independent or have at least a right to decide again as to whether it wants to become independent. I think that would more than likely be the best route to go down, is looking for other countries to endorse us and then put pressure on the main government to respect the democratic wishes of the Scottish people. Yeah,
it's chicken and egg, isn't it? Because
exactly.
The major countries are never going to break ranks in that way because
that's it.
The pressure from Westminster will be intense. And Westminster would then say to the Spanish, for example, well, there you are. If you want us to support Catalonia, you're going about it the right way.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you end up with a sort of bit of a bun fight going on.
Uh-huh.
It wouldn't happen that way because the Spanish would then say, okay, we won't say anything. And
Nah.
I suspect everyone else would take the same view. The reality is that you need the endorsement of these countries, but they're much more likely to give you that endorsement if Westminster has already signed off.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, look, you at Westminster, you agreed to this, and these people made that choice. I'm sorry, you made your bed, you have to lie in it.
Aye.
So some people have suggested a constitutional convention, i.e. that the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government gets everyone together as representative as possible.
Yeah.
And then they put together, say, a constitution for Scotland or a similar document like a claim of right writ large, and present that to the people and say, do you agree with this? Because I gather the Scottish Parliament has a power to have a referendum, because all referendums are consultative.
Yeah.
They're not mandatory. Brexit wasn't mandatory. And they could do it that way. What would you think of that idea?
I think that would be a good idea. If the Scottish Government were able to bring something together to present to the Scottish people and allow them to vote on, if we were to get the majority in that and were able to present that to Westminster, I think that would, be the nail in the coffin and provide the definitive proof that they bang on about so much, that the once in a generation vote was actually, we've had multiple. It's been 8 years since then, and people like me didn't have an opportunity to have a say when that happened. And that would prove that the people of Scotland do want independence and that Westminster should respect their wishes.
Do you think the franchise ought to be reduced this time around? I mean, last time anyone could vote, but that's unusual in referenda. I mean, generally what happens is that you can vote, wherever you come from, you can vote in local elections, but you can't vote in referenda because you have to be sort of, be there for some time or whatever. I don't know, there's a qualifier of some kind.
I really think that if we make it so it's obviously allow 16-year-olds to vote like with any other election in Scotland, I think if we make it the people of Scotland to decide, then that would probably be the best idea.
Yeah. What's your take on what's happening in Northern Ireland? I mean, for example, they have a situation there where it looks like the next assembly might be led by Sinn Féin, which is a nationalist party who believe in reunification. If that were to happen, what impact or not do you think that might have on the scene in Scotland?
I think, if Sinn Féin were to get in, it would be a positive step in the right direction for nationalists who want to have their own right to self-determination. Obviously, Ireland, if Ireland vote in Sinn Féin, then that shows that the people of Ireland do want the reunification. And then, of course, if they were to request that from Westminster, they should be allowed a referenda on their own self-determination, just like Scotland deserves it. But I think if that was to happen, it would be hopefully a push in the right direction for the Scottish independence cause.
Yeah, it is sort of interesting what's happening there, because it's, there's odd things happening in Northern Ireland. I gather now, as of yesterday, the Irish government has received more applications from Northern Ireland than ever before for Irish passports. Yeah, which suggests that whoever's asking for these passports clearly doesn't have an ideological problem with carrying a presently foreign passport. Yeah, and honestly, speaking to people who are travelling overseas, it's hard not to see the attraction in that. Yeah, because if you've spoken to anyone who's stood in a queue at Lisbon airport for 3 or 4 hours waiting to get because you're non-EU. Yeah, you have to queue somewhere else. Yeah, and I've heard of people going up to the sort of customs officer saying, "Look, I voted against Brexit. I would like to use my British passport." I suspect you're only going to do that if you've had a few beers on the flight. Yeah, but maybe that's why it's only men that get involved in these stories that we hear about. But it speaks to a practicality about people dissociating themselves from a vote. And we spoke to Europe for Scotland last week on the show, and their contention, one of their hopes rather, is that if Scotland became independent, it would have a galvanising effect on they hoped people south of the border to challenge the Brexit vote.
Yeah.
To say, look, there Scotland voted against Brexit and has gone. These troubles will multiply until we get a chance to re-look at that situation again.
Yeah.
Does that sound plausible? Does that sound like something that is a reasonable argument to you?
Yeah, I would say so. I hope that would be the case. If for people south of the border to see that Scotland has realised what's happened with being dragged out of the EU and have made their own decision to go their own way to do what's best for their people.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to me that so much of this whole debate is predicated upon the fact that decisions were taken on a certain basis. We hear that Cambridge Analytica were involved in the Brexit campaign, which is their claim to fame, as I understand it, is that they succeeded in getting Trump elected.
Yeah.
By using social media. The notion that you get a Facebook posting that says, I'm greatly in favour of more spend on education, and the person next door gets one that says, I'm completely opposed to the lousy level of education we have at present.
Yeah.
It's all targeted based on likes and dislikes and goodness knows what else.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does sound a bit sort of strange in many respects. Well, we're almost out of time. What message would you give to everyone watching tonight and listening right now, and in the future, by the way, who are watching on YouTube? What message would you like? What thought or matter would you like to leave people with that you feel particularly strongly about?
For myself, it would definitely be to take what the younger generation are saying and listen to it, because for too many years we've had our political voices cast aside, so to speak, and give us our opportunity to say what we believe in and not have it be left down to the adults that run Westminster or the adults that run even Scottish Parliament. Let us have a platform to say what we like and to have our political voices heard.
Great, that's fantastic. Euan, we're just about to close now on the broadcast, but can you stick around for a few minutes afterwards?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. I'm going to make a few closing remarks here.
Yeah, no worries.
A big thank you to you, and a big thank you to all of you for watching tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the TNT show as much as I have. I hope that last message from Euan has struck a chord, has resonated with you, that young people would like more of an involvement, more of a say, and it's down to all of us, I would suggest to you, to make sure that happens. As ever, we've got formidable guests lined up for future shows. I've always said this is the place for the big hitters and also the young hitters too, who can be big hitters as well. Remember the Indie Live, what's on guide, you'll find that on indielive.net. We'll be back at the same time next week. I hope you'll be able to join us. And please do look out for Elliot Bilmore's column in the Sunday National this weekend. Again, you'll find it in the 7-day supplement. As I said earlier, when we were talking with Euan, British democracy at work. According to a recently published data, the new Murdoch-backed channel GB News gets effectively 0 viewers, in quotes. I'll give you an example of how desperate they are. I was approached by one of their producers to appear on one of their shows to comment on Westminster. Now, since the BBC have never asked me to comment on anything, maybe that's a sign of desperation. On reflection, maybe I should have agreed, as they might not be around for too much longer. Thanks again. Have a very good night. Join us next Wednesday. Take care. Stay safe. Look after each other. Good night, all.